Hey everyone, it's Ed Gutowski, and what I wanted to do was to create a video that kind of gives you some information, little lecture on The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas by Ursula Le Guin. Hopefully you have taken the quiz after this, and this will just give you some more background into the story. Ursula Le Guin's The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas, it's a fabulous short story, but it can be a little complicated for students, right? Because I think when the story starts off, Le Guin can use a lot of detail that can kind of overwhelm students. And I think there's a reason that she kind of uses all those details. But notice, if I was in a ground class, what I would do is I'd start off the story and I'd ask students, okay, so we know the story is called The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas. So I asked students to kind of imagine, where would you set Omelas if you were going to make this into kind of a blockbuster movie or a TV show? Because notice, we could argue that the story is very kind of similar to like old episodes of The Twilight Zone, right? But it's Ursula Le Guin tells us that the ones who walk away from Omelas, the city itself is the happiest place on earth. Right, that you can do everything that your heart desires in Omelas. It's picturesque, it's beautiful. I sometimes think it's set next to the coast. So I kind of start off by asking students, okay, given that Omelas is the most beautiful, picturesque city, where would you set it? And so sometimes for me, I kind of imagine setting it in places like, for some reason I have a real beautiful image of like Vail, Colorado, right? That it's set near the mountains, it's picturesque. You might set it near Lake Tahoe, right? Because I think Omelas is set near a lake, right? But it's this picturesque, beautiful city, right? Notice we could set it in Amsterdam, right? Because Amsterdam, if you've never been to Amsterdam, Amsterdam is an amazing city. It's beautiful. People love Amsterdam, but you can do anything that you desire in Amsterdam, right? So notice you can go to Amsterdam, you can go to the Van Gogh Museum, you can see Anne Frank's house, but you can go to a cafe where you can get a great cup of coffee, but you can also order from their little special menu where you can get, drugs or illegal substances. Amsterdam's also known for its famous red light district, right? So, and these are kind of links to Omelas that we'll talk about in the video a little bit. You could also set it in Las Vegas, right? Because Las Vegas, you can do anything and everything that you desire, or maybe just set it in Disneyland because Disneyland's the happiest place on earth. But the reasons I ask these questions is because notice that in Omelas, when I keep repeating the word, you can do anything your heart desires, what does that mean? Well, notice people are just overwhelmingly happy, right? There's kind of a music festival going on. People are happy, and they can do everything they want, right? I mean, if you wanted to, you could just take some drugs, shoot heroin on the street. No one's going to judge you, right? There talk about, hey, you can go and have an orgy. So it's almost like Burning Man or something, right? But you can do everything. You can always be happy. It's a place of bliss. However, right, there is a price to that happiness. And this was kind of the reference to the second question on the quiz, right? Because I said, and my memory of the story might be wrong, because sometimes in a ground class, students tell me my original reading of the story is wrong. But every once in a while, I've had some students who tell me, no, I'm right. But my original memory of the story is once in your life, you had to go to spot X. And if you went to spot X, there was Y. This was essentially the second question on the quiz. I like the idea that once in your life, you have to go to spot X because then you're vested, right? Because you have to go. And sometimes students still point out, no, you don't have to go. It was optional. You know about spot X, and you don't have to go. Again, I like the fact that you would have to go to spot X because then you're vested. And notice the second question on the quiz was, what is X and what is Y? So for X, there could be many interpretations. It could be the city hall. It could be the town center. It could be a cellar. It could be a basement. I'd kind of have some leeway on what spot X is, but there is no leeway with Y. So let's just say spot X is you go to the basement. And in the basement, that's X. What Y is Y is the suffering child. And notice that they say there's nothing you can do to help this poor child. If you help this poor child, society will collapse. and crumble. And if I were to pick up this child right now and put it right here, we could talk about, let's look at that poor child, right? That poor child is suffering. It's covered in a layer of filth and grime and dirt. I think it barely talks. It maybe used to talk. It's starving and, right, it's got pus, sore, and there's absolutely nothing you can do to help this child. If you do anything to help this child, society will crumble. And notice people who go and see the child, they don't know what to do. Some just break down and cry. Some are so mad they kick the child, right? But no one knows what to do, because if you do anything to help that child, society will crumble. And notice the last question was pretty easy on the quiz. How does the story end? Some people walk away, right? They're so frustrated, they walk away, and we don't know what happens to them. And I always like to ask, do the people who walk away, are they making a difference, right? Wouldn't it be better if they walked over to the next town and they got Chuck Norris, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Steven Seagal, and they came back and Schwarzenegger was jumping out of a helicopter with a machine gun shooting everything up. He grabs the child and they go off. But notice, you can't do that, because if you help the child, society will crumble. And so there's a lot going on in this story. And so the key to understanding the story is to ask what the child symbolizes or what the child represents. Because once you ask what the child represents, the story becomes really, really interesting. So there is textual evidence to suggest that what the child symbolizes is a Christ-like figure. And this can be a link back to mythic criticism. But there is an idea that the child represents Christ, because the child is suffering for you. The child is suffering for your greater good. Well, if that's the case, then the child becomes a bit of a Christ-like figure. But oftentimes it's students who have come up with the greatest ideas on what the child represents. Because I one time had a student in a summer school class, a couple of students said that they thought that the child represented Mexico. I said, well, why did you think the child represented Mexico? Well, these were some summer school students, and they were taking the class during summer, but they were full-time students at San Diego State. And they said, look, when you go to San Diego State as a freshman, you're 18 years old, you're not allowed to drink, you can't really do drugs. So what students do is they just go right across the border and they go to Tijuana. And in Tijuana, you can do anything you want. You can take drugs, you can legally drink, you can go and see some sort of private shows. What you can do is you can party and you can rage, and then you just come back across the border, right? And everything is the same. And if you think about it, right, San Diego is one of the most expensive, prosperous cities in the United States. And Tijuana is one of the most poorest cities in Mexico, if not one of the poorest cities in the world. And so the child very much could represent poverty, could represent social class, could represent inequality, but that opens up the door for the child to represent a great many things, right? That's a great interpretation. And again, it's one of the reasons why I like when students come up with their own ideas, because sometimes when students come up with their own ideas, they're vastly superior than crap that academic scholars come up with or that you just find on the internet. Another student felt that the child represented Nike. And I was like, Nike, the shoe company? And they were like, yeah. And so how do you figure that it represents Nike? Well, if you think about it, in 2025, maybe Nike likes to use athletes. They used to use the athlete Michael Jordan to sell their shoes. Today, let's just say they use LeBron James or Stephen Curry. And let's just assume that the LeBron James shoes cost like $500. There's some people who may spend $500 for LeBron shoes. But where does Nike make their product? Well, historically, they made their product right in China using sweatshop labor. So all of a sudden, the child becomes really interesting if you think of the story representing a company like Nike or representing child labor. And that opens the door for the child to represent things like our iPhone. Our iPhones are, our technology, which we're all dependent on, right? But the minerals that they come from Africa, where they use child labor to get those minerals, right? So there's all sorts of interesting ideas. Now, there is some scholarship to suggest, because the child is covered in kind of a layer of dirt and filth, right, that the child could represent gas and oil. And if you think about it, generally in the United States, we've historically got our gas and oil from the Middle East. And these are countries that, are guilty of some human rights abuses, right? Environmental exploitation, right? But yet we are so dependent on gas and oil, we're willing to pay that cheap need to fulfill our economy. And if you think about it, what would happen if if you found out, you went home and they said, we've run out of gas and oil? Well, society would quickly start to crumble and fall apart. So I like the idea that the child is gas and oil. I also think the child could represent rhetoric, because they say that there's no reason we can't save the child, but why not? Why can't we save the child? And then if you look at the condition of the child, if we say, how old is this child? And let's just say this child is 2 years. Well, given its condition, how long is that child going to live? Most likely it's only going to live maybe 6 months, another year, and then it's going to die. Well, if there's nothing we can do to help the child, then society really only has 1 or 2 years left before it's going to crumble. So I think the story really kind of represents rhetoric, and how governments and societies can use that rhetoric to manipulate and even oftentimes lie to us. Now, it was a genius idea, because what a student did, and I don't think there's any textual evidence for this, but they imagined what would happen if you looked deeper in the cellar and you saw there were more bodies, more children. Well, that clearly would say, hey, they're not being honest with us, because if they have more children hidden in the basement, why can't we save the child? So the story raises all sorts of moral and ethical issues, right? I mean, I have to always ask students, if you lived in Omelas, would you stay or would you walk away? But the key to the story is to understand, ask what the child represents. And once you do, it's a game changer. And I think that's why at the start of the story, Le Guin uses so many details. She uses lots of details to convince people, the reader, that Omelas is the happiest place on earth, and that it might be overwhelming, but once you meet that suffering child, the entire story changes. So I hope this video helped out, and maybe you respond in the post to some of my thoughts on the video. But Omelas is a great story, and we'll see where we go from here.